Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Modern Mom's Roadmap to Balance podcast. This is Kayla Middleton, your host, and today my guest is Kristin Mize. She is a licensed therapist and coach specializing in maternal mental health, and she has over 20 years of experience. She is a mom of 3 boys and is a survivor herself of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. She helps overwhelmed moms overcome anxiety, perfectionism, and people pleasing so they can be the calm, confident, and connected mom they always were meant to be. Welcome, Kristen.
Hi, thank you so much, Kayla. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for giving us your time. And so the first question that I always ask everyone is, what is your definition of a balanced life?
Oh gosh. So lately, I would say within the last year, balanced life for me as a mom of 3 and as a business owner and a wife has honestly been when this may sound silly, but when my nervous system, when I'm regulated, when my nervous system is in that regulated space, that's when I know I can take a good deep breath. I can rest, I can sleep at night, And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the things around me are quote unquote
Mm,
balanced, but it's more about
yeah.
starting with me. And that obviously, if I'm, more regulated, I can move about my day, interact with my kids,
Mm.
my husband, my clients in a much more balanced, present way.
And what does that look like for you specifically?
So for me, it looks like setting boundaries with my work schedule. I know you own your own business, as do I. Summertime gets tricky with the kids. And so
It
it's
can.
really, yeah, it's, you're an Uber driver and all of that. But it's when I can when I start, I'll say it like this, when I start to feel myself overextended, I notice it in my body
Mm.
first. And so if I start to feel overwhelmed or tense, I usually sense that in my nervous system first. And that I just look at as a sign, okay, where can I pull back? How can I do things differently? And so whether that's, spacing out my clients more or taking a mental
Mm.
health day, or maybe I'm doing too much, running my kids around to too many places, I'll tell them to pause, um, really checking in with myself pretty consistently. And I've been doing that for a few years now. And it's been super helpful so that I'm not overextending myself and then ending up, in burnout. Like, that was my cycle years and years ago.
Mm.
So it's really,
Yeah.
and
And
checking in with my gut literally before I say yes to anything. As best I can, right? So that it's not
yeah.
obligatory. It's coming from a place where I have the bandwidth.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
And you mentioned before we hit the record button that your children are older.
Yes.
I mean, not older as an adults,
Ah,
but they're in their preteen and
yeah.
teen years.
Uh-huh. Yes.
At what point did you recognize this piece for yourself? Did you find it early on, or do you find that it was something recent or more in the middle?
So it's interesting because, I work with women in all stages of motherhood, whether they're trying to conceive and struggling, or they have newborns, toddlers, and now teens. I think you have to redo and revisit this work at every stage. Originally,
Yes.
I started working on my emotion regulation and my nervous system healing when they were toddlers, and I felt so
Mm.
burnt out. I was just burning the candle at all ends. They demanded a lot of my physical energy at the time. I was trying to
Mm.
build a business. My husband's career took him out of the home a lot of hours of the week. And I had this perfectionistic, I have to do everything right. Everything has to be just so. My kids have to behave, they have to go to bedtime at a certain time. So I was a walking ball of stress, and
Mm.
probably just so much adrenaline and cortisol and blah. And I was wondering why my kids wouldn't go to bed and be calm. So I really
Yeah.
started working on that when they were toddlers to try and calm
Mm.
myself down through breath work and mindfulness. That was the first time I practiced mindfulness, was like 10 years ago. And I was a skeptic. I was like, I can't sit and
Yeah.
pay attention to my thoughts. And, it's so easy. I try and tell people, anyone listening, anybody can practice mindfulness.
Mm.
I don't care if it's for 30 seconds or 10 minutes. But so I started then, and I was able to grow my stress tolerance that way and
Mm.
really look at, okay, what is my agenda? Getting things done, or, running my family, running my household versus a toddler's or three
Mhm.
toddlers. And just the vast dissonance between those, it really helped open my eyes to, all right, let's bring it back, right? And so letting
Yes.
go of a lot of my expectations and even just trying to connect with them more and teach them
Mm.
calming and emotion regulation skills. That was new to me. Um,
Yeah.
Growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was just like, go to your room, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Or I'll give you
Absolutely.
something to cry about, or it's not that bad, calm down, right?
Hmm.
But obviously, I'm a lifelong learner, and we didn't really learn about the nervous system when I was in school, grad school.
Yeah,
It
I
was
don't think we did either. Like just pausing to think it maybe, and I'm like, but was that in biology class? I
right,
don't think it was like
right.
specifically in our, or for at least mine, therapy program.
No, no. It was about changing your mindset, changing your thoughts.
Hmm.
Obviously, some trauma informed practices, but that was the missing link that changed my world, changed the lens in which I practice, in my counseling and in my coaching, and then also changed the way I'm able to parent my kids. Um, so that all started when they were toddlers. But then
Hmm.
recently, and I thought we had a good thing going, but then teenage years hit and preteen. And so it was
Yeah.
kind of like going back again. And that
Mm.
was really eye opening. I had to do a lot more work on myself, on, even like the way I grew up, what was coming up for me in my
Mm.
reactions to these teenage
Yeah.
or preteen behaviors. And so I would say it's constant work, but I don't want to say that in a bad way. It's just
Hmm.
it offers hope for sure, because it means there's always going to be more you can learn and grow. So those I would think of the two time frames in which
Mm.
working on regulating myself
Yeah.
and finding a new norm and understanding typical development of my kids was super helpful. Those two times stand out.
Mm. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. And one thing that stood out to me that I don't think we've really touched on in the podcast is the stress tolerance.
Yeah.
So being able to tolerate a little bit more stress. And when we're speaking, or when we're talking about toddlers specifically,
Hmm.
I think what moms are often thinking is, okay, well, I'm going to regulate myself. And then I'm going to be able to show my child how to better behave or better act.
Hmm.
And so because I'm doing it in this calm way, they're going to actually get it and
Hmm.
they're going to do that versus we're regulating ourselves.
Yeah.
We're trying to get to a calmer state. Yes, to teach them in a way that they can hear us,
Yeah.
but they're not necessarily going to just all of a sudden a light bulb switch and they're these well-behaved children all of the time.
Yes.
But what's really happening is for us as moms being able to tolerate some of their hustle and bustle of being a toddler, their,
Yes.
rambunctiousness that comes
Mhm.
with toddlerhood and learning how to behave and act, or not, I don't even want to use it behave, but live in this world.
Yes, exactly. Live authentically, right? It is
Hmm.
completely developmentally appropriate, especially coming from, I grew up with sisters and then having three boys. I thought there was something going to be wrong with it. They were just nonstop, and just
Mm.
understanding, taking time to understand that I want to parent. I call it realistic parenting. Okay. It doesn't, maybe it's conscious parenting. It may be gentle. It
Mm.
may be a lot of things, but I want to be conscious of letting them be authentic. And as toddlers, they're going to have energy and they're going to be silly
Yeah.
and they're going to spill milk at dinner. And so that was huge to help, and hugely helpful for me, is to understanding like what is age appropriate, and they're doing what is age appropriate. Whereas, and I'm not sure if this was the case in your home growing up, but I see that it was in my own case in most of my clients where, and I'm the firstborn, I'm not sure if you are.
Okay. Yes, I'm also the
Yeah,
firstborn.
firstborn
Yeah.
daughter. I call it a syndrome, but you know, we were to be seen and not heard. Don't make a mistake.
Mhm.
Don't ruffle the feathers. Certainly don't have an opinion, right? And this is no knock on our parents. They certainly did the best they could with what they know. But what that did was, and research shows, is we then started to get small and sort of
Mm-hmm.
deny parts of ourselves, like the silly parts, right? And so what we were denying is actually now what we know to be developmentally and age appropriate. It was
Mm-hmm.
just sort of like parented out of us, or sometimes scared out of us.
Oh
And so
yeah, I would say
that was,
scared.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it was just the time we grew up in, and they didn't have the resources that we now have to learn different ways or to understand both parents and kids in a different light. So
Yeah.
that was really, a light bulb went off with that. And especially now as it relates
Mm,
to my teenagers and preteens, when I want to, like, that's disrespectful,
yeah.
but can they help it? Like, there's so much going
Mm-hmm.
on in their brain, right? So certain things they cannot help. It can be, parented and corrected, but I'm a huge believer on connection before correction now.
Oh,
And that's
absolutely.
that's helped, but that was just something that just never happened, if you're a
Mm-hmm.
millennial in your
Oh
home.
yeah. No, it was do as I say. Don't ask me why, because if you ask me why, it's just gonna be because I told you so, which isn't
Exactly.
helpful because
Right.
you never learn anything with I told you so. You never know what's going on in your parent's mind if it's just no, it's because I said. How do you learn from that? How do you learn to not do that again? So what
Right.
ends up happening is for us as kids, since we're talking about ourselves right now,
Yeah.
we just learn to, okay, let me see what kind of mood my parent is in.
Yeah.
What is like their mood? Can I bring this up? Or maybe I just won't bring it up at all because last time I brought something up like this, I was grounded. So I'm just gonna hide it away and just tell my best friend about it. Maybe not even her, because I'm scared she'll tell my mom or something, right?
Yes. And then we wonder why we're all anxious, like walking on eggshells, or again, like being afraid to do certain things that,
Mm,
and what that does is it sends a message to our nervous system that we're in danger,
yeah.
right? And so
Mm-hmm.
chronic exposure to that sense of fight or flight adds to anxiety, burnout, health
Yeah.
problems. And I think that's what we started seeing. I know myself, I was 31 and I had shingles. Like,
Mm,
a
wow.
lot of my clients struggle with health problems. Turns out when you can reduce the stress, or, work on some of these things like perfectionism, people pleasing,
Mm-hmm.
overextending yourself, it can get better, you know?
Yeah. It can. It can. It doesn't have to stay like this forever. There is hope. And yes, it does take some work and it does take some refining because things will never stay the same. Your toddler's not going to be a toddler forever. They're they're
Yes.
they're going to be teenagers and then they're going to be adults. And
Yeah.
so some of this stuff takes some reworking as your child and as you change. Because us as parents also change
Yes.
as well as we continue living and get older.
Yeah. I told my 14-year-old, I said, I'm growing up with you. I'm learning with you, and that's just the way I choose to parent. Like, and he does not rule the roost, don't get me wrong. But I'm choosing to do things differently where he has that freedom to express himself. I want to be the safe space,
Hmm.
and what I have found, I'm getting, but the less I pushed him, and this also I found with toddlers, the less attention we give to the behaviors we don't want to see, the more likely they are to
Mm.
dwindle, right? Whereas I was
Yeah.
nag, 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 nag on my son, and he was pushing farther and farther away. And the more I just kind of saw him for who he was as a person, not the state of his room or his,
Yeah.
teen
Hmm.
language that they speak, the more he came around,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah. And these are really good instances to even be able to reflect for ourselves. What was I like as a teenager? What was expected of me? And even if you come up with, I could never have let my room get to that state,
Right.
ask yourself why.
Yeah.
What would happen to you? Because
Right.
that's usually what is triggering us is
Mhm.
what would happen if you did let your room get to that state? And that's what
Exactly.
you're fearing. And that fear
Exactly.
is being mirrored to your child, like on your child.
Hmm. Yeah, but it doesn't come out as fear. It comes out as yelling and
Yes.
disconnect.
Yes.
But absolutely, I had to realize, like, oh my gosh, this would have gotten me in so much trouble. And it
Mm,
comes out. fight or flight, it can come out in yelling, right? It can come out in retreating
Yeah.
and just ignoring the problem, right? But either one, it creates this moment of disconnect between you and your kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what one of the things that I was trying to get to earlier, which we kind of went on a bit of a tangent. I don't want to even say tangent because they're very related. But one of the things I was trying to mention earlier when I brought up the story of how oftentimes, because I see this in many of my clients, is oftentimes when our children are not doing exactly as we say or behaving in a way that we want them to behave, it's put on us as if, what am I doing wrong as a parent that my child is not following a direction? How have you seen that within your own clients or within yourself?
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because recently it's come up a lot with my clients who are all moms and their firstborns. Okay. I don't know.
Mm,
So where they have a hard time connecting or they're easily triggered by it's not always their firstborn, but it's usually the one who's pretty, headstrong and maybe a little bit anxious themselves or perfectionistic, likes to do things a certain way. Or if they're I see this a lot with moms of kiddos who have some neurodivergent because
mm,
they're not progressing in the textbook way or of how
yeah.
they were expected to, and that can be really triggering and scary for them. And so I do a lot of reminding and educating and coaching on, ways to meet the needs of kids that are different than us,
Mm,
right? And a lot of reminding, and again, this is something I had to learn myself of what is appropriate. We can't expect a 4-year-old to remember the same thing, just because they get it once doesn't mean it's going to happen
yeah.
every single time. But here's the thing, if you grew up perfectionistic, pleasing, afraid to make mistakes, you quickly learned, right?
Yeah.
Out of fear, a lot of times.
Hmm.
And whatever that might look like, right? Maybe you just wouldn't get, approval or admiration from your parents, or maybe you would get yelled at, or maybe you would get hit, right? So,
Hmm.
I can tell you every single one of my clients, and I imagine you can see this as well. They come to therapy because they don't want to be that way. They don't want to raise
Yeah.
their kids the way they were raised. And so they're open to
Hmm.
hearing different things, right? They're open to hearing that information. So that can be really powerful. I don't want to mess up my kids. I hear that all the time. And I didn't
Yeah.
either. And that's what put me back in therapy when I had kids again. So, but it's so much learning, I think, can be really powerful. What is appropriate? And how do I help moms realize, how do you want to respond, not react? How do you want to
Yeah.
respond to your kid when they're not doing something that you think they should be? And that's, it's so much about responding, not reacting. When we're reacting, we're, you know, repeating
Hmm.
patterns. So that's how I try and help moms recognize, how did you want someone to show up for you when you were a kid? And
Yeah.
that can be pretty powerful.
I think too, it's also helpful to help them differentiate your child not following a direction. It's not a fault on you.
Right.
We're just so used to, depending on how you were raised,
Yeah.
probably used to the instant do as I say and don't question me,
Mhm.
which led to that, like, quote unquote, following direction.
Right, right. Or as you mentioned too, we tend to blame or shame ourselves if our child isn't acting a certain way because maybe you were the mini adult in your family or
Mhm.
the caretaker. And you could get your siblings to follow along, maybe not, but the stakes are a
Yeah.
lot higher when we're dealing with our own human beings, that we grew. But yeah, it has zero reflection on your values, on your worth, if your child is having a
Mhm.
hard time.
Yeah. So you had mentioned before we hit record that you also have struggled with anxiety and perinatal mood and anxiety disorder.
Mhm.
What was that like for you? How
Oh
were you
man.
able to get through some of that?
Yes. Well, you think, okay, well, first of all, I grew up, I knew I wanted to be the helper. Okay. I was always the helper in my family, the firstborn. I was always the easy one that, quote, nobody had to worry about. And so I was just a natural helper. So I go into this field and I learn and I get my master's, and all throughout, I think I had my first panic attack at 20. And I thought, well,
Okay.
that's weird. Like I'm not
Yeah.
anxious. I'm not worried. I liked to be busy
Mm,
and to get perfect grades and to, be with my friends and work out. So I didn't recognize it as, oh, I'm worrying about things. But as, I went through little bouts here and there, like major transitions in life. When I graduated college, I had a lot of anxiety. What now?
mm,
Even though I was signed up for grad school. When I finished grad school, more anxiety. And I would, use a combination of medication and therapy for each of these situations. It was very situational themed. But again, I'm like, I got this. I know what to do. I studied this. And so fast forward, we struggled with some infertility, had our first baby, perfect pregnancy, perfect everything. I felt great. The twins come
mm.
along, and yes, it was unexpected. Well, we still had to go through fertility, but things were good until they weren't. I was hit around week 20 with just an absolute, it was really hard. The only people that knew were my husband and my sister. I was still going to work every day. And now looking at it, it was probably total shutdown from burnout, more so than,
Mm,
the thoughts like, I don't want this. I think the depressive thoughts can come after your body shuts down. I know they can. So who knows,
yeah.
chicken or the egg, but it
Hmm.
wasn't a good situation for me with work either in a toxic agency. And so honestly, I didn't know how to get out of it. It took my husband and my sister saying, we're calling somebody. We don't know what to do. This is terrible. You're not yourself. And so I got right in with my perinatologist, who got me right in at Emory University, their women's mental health center here in Atlanta.
Okay.
Again, nothing was heard of at this time. It was almost 13 years ago. And I was like, what? There's
Mm,
a reproductive mental health center? And got in there, and she was able to start me on a medication that felt scary to other, you go to your OB and they likely offer you Zoloft, and it doesn't work for everybody.
hmm. Yeah,
So
they don't always.
yeah, working specifically with a reproductive psychiatrist, they know all the research, they know what's safe, they are more willing to try certain combinations of things that can really help. And so, it was almost like instantly when I met with both the perinatologist and the psychiatrist that I felt like a huge weight was lifted, because I thought there was something wrong with me. Like, you should be so grateful. You should, all the should thoughts,
Mm,
right? Like, what is wrong with you? You should, be jumping for joy that you can have this, pregnancy and it's healthy and all of that nonsense. But it was really weighing on me. And as soon as I met with him, it was like a placebo effect. I felt like, oh my gosh, okay, this isn't my fault and I'll be okay. And so, yeah, the rest of my pregnancy was really good. And here we are today. Again, therapy and medication kind of throughout. I just accept that as there is a family history,
mm,
and certainly I like to do more holistic things to help myself, like exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, spending time in nature, connecting, all of those things, which are super helpful. But I personally am just someone who knows that this is just what it is for me to manage my anxiety.
mm. What do you mean? This is what it is for you? Like those things that you were talking about that you do for yourself?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And
Okay.
continuing with medication and
Mm.
therapy. I mean, listen, therapists need therapists. And so, just having a safe space to go when I'm hitting a certain season that's harder than
Mm.
others.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I say mom ain't easy. And so there's obviously times where the stress of being a mom and the overwhelm take its toll more than others. And I have more bandwidth during certain stages of life than others. And I think that's the same for my clients.
Hmm.
They come to me having had everything great, right? They were just high functioning, type
Mm.
A, probably anxious individuals. And then motherhood hits, and there's no like grade that you get or,
Hmm.
certificate that you get to let you know you're doing it right, you're doing
Yeah.
it well. And without that, I think that's where a lot of women flounder.
Yeah. I've also found that when women who are high functioning and they're anxious, but they don't realize it's anxiety because they're just going, almost not intentionally avoiding, but to avoid.
Right.
So when they have a child, it's kind of like, bam, you realize what you were doing before is no longer sustainable on top of having a child,
Yeah.
because a child also takes so much of your time and energy.
Mhm.
And so that's when it's like, oh my gosh, something is wrong and I need to do something about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We feel like we're drowning or, survival mode, however you
Mm-hmm.
want to put it. And and that's a lot of times too when I think when they are kind of halted to a stop, right? Maternity leave for some people, they go nuts. They're like, oh my gosh, I need to
Oh
get out
yeah.
of the house. Or, I was one of them, to be quite honest.
Me too.
Um,
Oh yeah.
but but then let's say you return back to work or things. So when you are forced to slow down, that's usually when people's bodies are like, wait, what? What do we do? And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's that adrenaline kick, it's that fight or flight because rest is not comfortable for
Yeah.
people like us. And so
Mm-hmm.
their bodies are going to react. And that's when we have symptoms like heart palpitations, tension, difficulty taking deep breaths, sometimes dizziness. And what is that? Anxiety, right? Those are
Yeah.
physical symptoms of anxiety, or their brain can now think or worry about other things that they weren't thinking or worrying about before. And so, yeah, I think
Yeah.
motherhood is a good way of slowing everybody down, even though it's such a hustle.
Oh yeah. And I think it also hits back on what we were talking about before in terms of that stress tolerance,
Yeah,
being able to tolerate some of the stress of being uncomfortable to tackle some of these things,
yeah,
or not to tackle, but to dive into some of these
yeah,
things.
yeah.
And that's why it's not unusual to have a little bit of increase in anxiety when working on your anxiety, because now you're taking things out, you're putting it all on the table and seeing
Mhm.
what it is that may need to be untangled.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that sort of how my years in practice have progressed because yes, of course, I specialize in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So women with, newborns to a year, 2 years. And
Mm,
what I found was we would, get them on track with managing and coping with the anxiety of being a new mom or even some of the intrusive thoughts or sleep anxiety. Okay, so that would check out. But then it's sort of the next step if they were to stay with me and want to work on this is always like, okay, so you've always been, fearful of making mistakes or fearful of disappointing people, right?
mhm,
Perfectionism, people pleasing. And so that kind of then turns some things up about childhood and core beliefs. And so certainly I only go there with clients that are willing to and want to because that's the deeper work.
mhm.
That's the
Yeah, it
beautiful
is.
stuff. But it's just interesting that I swear everybody who came through my doors was already prone to. And they say
Yeah.
that's a huge risk factor for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is type A personality or a
Mm,
history of some anxiety when you were younger. Yeah, I enjoy helping moms do the deeper work too. I feel like you can get longer lasting results when you can really
oh, absolutely.
help them realize
Yeah,
like it's not you.
I often tell people or anyone that I am having like consultation with or a client that you come to therapy usually because you
Mhm.
have a bunch of fires going,
Yes.
and we can get those fires under control. We can get them,
Mhm.
out, no more fires. But when the work really happens is after we've been able to extinguish those fires to work on the deeper things. Because if we don't do that, these fires will come back.
And
It's
they
the
do.
deeper work that makes the lasting change.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny you say that because I have had instances multiple times where clients come in initially with a new baby and then they come back around 2 to 3 because it has come back in different
Mm,
forms,
mhm. Yeah.
so absolutely. And that's normal and that's okay. It's okay to have to go back for more support, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh,
yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah, yeah. So but I really I'm kind of nerdy about it. I really enjoy it because and it's just so eye-opening. I'm like I said, I'm just kind of a research nerd also, and just understanding how we as millennials, some Gen X women, mothers, were programmed, and how that
Mhm.
is affecting our own mental health, but also our own expectations, our own beliefs. And so many of us, at least I know our perspective is skewed, right? People come to us for help. There's a lot of people out there who don't want it necessarily, but so many of us are trying to undo and redo and start,
Yeah.
new patterns. And it's
Mhm.
so cool to
Yeah.
walk
It
alongside
really
women
is.
to do that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about your coaching? What are you doing on that side? Because you're a therapist, but you're
Yeah.
also a coach, correct?
Yes, yes. So really it came out of my passion for sharing my knowledge with more people,
Mm,
having a bigger impact. And so while counseling, I'm only licensed in the state of Georgia, and I see clients in my office, I see them virtually. What I also realized is some of the women, many in fact, coming to my office don't necessarily qualify with, like, let's say, a diagnosis code of a mental health
mm.
condition. Okay. I don't think perfectionism or people pleasing is in the DSM, right? So,
No.
however, I could still take the skills that I'm teaching clients in my office who want to come see me to more people who don't necessarily
Mm,
think, oh, I don't need therapy, or I don't want therapy, or, but they still get stuck in these similar patterns. So, ideally, or not ideally, my clients are all the same. I market to perfectionistic, people pleasing, anxious, or
mm,
overwhelmed moms. And it's really an A to Z map of, okay, yes, we can put out some fires, but we
mm,
also, it's kind of going in from the inside out. And so, it's a 3-month online course. It's self-paced, and I teach everything from regulating and healing your nervous system, because that is so much a part of today's, I think, long-term healing work, all
yeah.
the way through really helping them understand, okay, why is it that you are the way you are today? It's not your fault. These are things that happened in childhood, and doing all the way through teaching self-compassion and mindfulness, and really helping redefine self-worth, all the way to the end where you can then feel good enough just showing up as you are, who you are, and you're able to be much more present with your kids, your partner,
Mm,
whatever you're doing, because you're not up in your head constantly with the anxiety, the worry, or the to-do list, or am I enough, or what is so and so doing over here? The comparison trap. So it seems broad, but I take you step by step on how to essentially be comfortable in your own skin, making your own decisions that work for you, for your family,
mm,
and not worrying about what other people are doing or saying. A lot of that too is teaching boundaries. That's part of the course. And so with that, you get coaching sessions once a week for the 12 weeks, group coaching. And the moms love that because they can also have camaraderie there, and realizing,
yeah.
oh, I'm not alone. And so that has been something that I just got off the ground this year. And I'm super excited about it because, like I said, I think there's such a need, but not everybody is going to take time and go sit in a counseling office for an hour a week for, years at this point.
Yeah.
It could take years, but this is sort of the fast track strategies and concepts to understand in order to reduce and unlearn your anxiety and perfectionism. And so, yeah, I could talk about it all day, but yeah, it's available to anyone worldwide because it's coaching, not therapy. And that's the beauty of it.
Okay. Awesome. And if any listeners here, what is the best way to get in contact with you, to get into your world?
Yeah, so my gosh, there's many ways, but you can find me on Instagram. It's at Calm Mom Collective. You can follow me there, DM. I do free webinars weekly on
Mm,
Wednesdays in my Facebook group. But if you find me on Instagram, I'll get you over to the Facebook group. But I do, 20 minutes. I call them mini podcasts, really. But I teach some things like growth mindset or nervous system regulation, or
mm,
I don't know, stress tolerance and things like that. Just little quips to kind of help you. So I would say that is the best way, is Instagram. And then I can figure out what you need and I can get you there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us today and giving us a little bit about your own wisdom and your perspective.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was an honor and it was really great speaking with you.
Thanks. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yes, you too. We're almost there.